Hi, so our Torah portion this week is Bamidbar, the beginning of the fourth of the five books of Moses. And again, my approach this year with all of these Torah portions has been to try to put ourselves in our world back into the world of the Bible, or the opposite, to bring the Bible and their world into the 21st century, and to see how those things help us to look differently at the old stories that we're familiar with. So here's a couple of examples. We're beginning with chapter 1 in the book of Numbers. If you have a Chumash, it's 769. And we read the following. On the first day of the second month in the second year following the exodus from the land of Egypt, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tent of meeting, saying, "Take a census of the whole Israelite community by the clans of its ancestral houses, listing the names, every male, head by head. You and Aaron shall record them by their groups from the age of 20 years up, all those in Israel who are able to bear arms. Associated with you shall be a man from each tribe, each one the head of his ancestral house." As it turns out, right now, we're living through a census. Every 10 years in America, obviously, we count how many people we have. And of course, we're aware that the reason we do this in America is primarily so that we can allot the proper number of representatives within each state to be elected to the House. And we also know that depending on the number of people, the states get certain amount of money to be able to use for their various needs. The census that we read about in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, has a very different purpose, and it was hinted at by the following. Number one, we only count men. Number two, you've got to be only 20 and above, nobody younger. And then we're told explicitly all those in Israel who are able to bear arms. So ultimately, we find out that the purpose of the census is to know how many soldiers each tribe can put into the field. And depending on that number, that's going to then impact where each tribe will be stationed when they go out to war. So all of these are critical things. We're seeing a great deal of commercials on TV these days, how important it is to participate in the census. And we've probably all received in the mail one or two letters so far, or postcards reminding us this is the year of the census, this is the time when we need to do these things. You can either go online, or ultimately, if you don't, somebody will probably come knocking at your door. Just like all of us received those notifications to participate and fill out the census forms, I imagined that all of the Israelites back in the desert received the following letter. Dear Israelite, pursuant to Adonai's command, we will be conducting a national census. Among the several benefits of such an accounting of our population is our ability to know how many men we can put into the field in case of a military emergency, What is the most efficient way to set up the Israelite camp around the tabernacle? And how much income we can potentially expect from the yearly half shekel collection so that we can plan our fiscal year, right? So it's interesting that today it's how much money each state will get. And in the census in the book of Numbers, it's how much money can the national government count on. Every male had to give a half shekel. So if we know how many people we have, we then know how much money we can expect. And that money was used to run the tabernacle and the sacrifices and all of those kinds of things. Representatives of each of the tribes will call on you at your tent. Please be courteous to them and honest with your answers. We are committed to maintaining your confidentiality. Here is a list of the authorized census takers. Sadly, today, there are so many people, whether it's dealing with the virus or whether it's the census or anything else, so many people are pretending to be somebody that they are not in order to try to deceive and to defraud all of us. So in the letter, people are told, here's the guy you can expect will show up at your door. Right? So I'm projecting back that they too were worried about fraud, and here was a way to make sure that the person who comes to your door is official. Tribe of Reuben, Elitzur ben Shteur. Shimon, Shlumiel ben Surishadai. Judah, Nachshon ben Aminadav. Issachar, Netanel ben Suar. Zvulun, Eliav ben Chelon. Ephraim, Elishama ben Amihud. Menashe, Gamliel ben Pedatsur. Binyamin, Avidan ben Gindoni. Dan, Achiezer ben Amishadai. Asher, Pagiel ben Ochran. Gad, Eliasaph ben Deuel. Naphtali, Achira ben Enan. By the way, as I read these names, 12 tribes, and we've got the 12 chieftains, and then their father's name as well. So we've got 24 plus another 12. We've got 36 Hebrew names just in this small passage. And it's interesting to see that the vast majority of these names are no longer ordinary names that Jews or even Israelis use. Clearly, the names of the tribes are. But when it comes to the people who were the chieftains of each of the tribes, these names are extremely rare. Shlumiel ben Surishadai, Achiezer ben Amishadai, Eliasaph ben Deuel. You don't hear many Jewish kids in America who get these kinds of names, and only rarely would you get an Israeli who uses these names. So it's fascinating, just as names go in and out of style, so too was the case with Hebrew names as well. So after saying why we need the census, and here's who's going to knock on your door to take the census, the census takers will ask the following questions. Number one, how many people dwell in your tent? Number two, what is the name, including father's name, age, and gender of each resident? Number three, what tribe was each resident born into? So generally, people camped with their families and the families within a tribe, but it's very possible that you had intermarriages between one tribe and another. So one of the things that was necessary to know was, okay, I know that I'm dealing with the tribe of Reuben, but is it possible that somebody in this tribe, in this tent, in this family, has married somebody from the tribe of Shimon? So in order to keep things all in order, we need to ask that question as well. Then we go on. Those from the tribe of Levi should note that they will not be part of the regular census, but will be assigned to tasks in the maintenance of the tabernacle. And again, if you remember, the reason for the census was to create an army. The Levites did not serve in the military in the same way everyone else did. The Levites' job was to protect and to deal with the ark and the tabernacle. So they had their own particular, they were the chaplain corps, you might say. And everybody else, they were going to go to war, so we needed to know their numbers. And then the letter ends. We thank you for your help in making this year's census a great success. And then the letter is signed, in my imagination, sincerely, Moshe ben Amram, which was Moses's full Hebrew name. So just as today we get postcards and letters telling us about the census, so happens that this week we read about the census from some 32, 33, 3,400 years ago. So that's chapter 1 of the book of Numbers. Brings us to chapter 2 of the book of Numbers. And we read the following. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, the Israelites shall camp, each with his standard, meaning a flag, under the banners of their ancestral house. They shall camp around the tent of meeting at a distance. So imagine that there was a very structured way that the people for 40 years camped. In the center of the camp, you had the tabernacle, which was a tent. And surrounding the tent were posts and material to create a large area that cut off the holy tent itself, the tabernacle, from the living quarters. So you've got, that is the very center, the Mishkan, the Ohel Moed, the tabernacle, the sanctuary in the desert. Around the sanctuary, you had the Levites. And the Levites basically, after Levi, one of the 12 sons of Jacob, he had, we find out, he had 3 sons. So we're going to find that on 3 sides of the tabernacle, you're going to have each of these clans of the Levite family. And on the 4th side, you're going to have the place of the Kohanim. The Kohanim, the priests, were a subgroup of the tribe of Levi. These were basically Aaron and his sons. Originally, Aaron had 4 sons. 2 of them died tragically, serving in the sanctuary. And then so Aaron is left with his 2 sons. So again, we've got in the core, in the center, we've got the sanctuary. Around, we've got 3 clans of Levites, and on the 4th side, we've got the Kohanim. And then on the 3rd ring, okay, we've got 4 sides clearly. We've got 12 tribes. So as you might guess, we're going to have 3 tribes are going to be on each side of this outer ring, all right? It's for a total of the 12 tribes. And how the tribes are placed, this one on the east, this one on the north, etc. How they're placed, who goes here, who goes in the middle, who goes on the end, right? And which of the three should be where will be dependent mainly upon their numbers. We didn't want to have to create a situation where you've got incredible crowding on one side and it's really thin on the other side. So as close as they were able to come, they try to spread out everybody on each side. And this is not just for aesthetic reasons, but for strategic reasons as well. An attack could come from this side or from that side. You need to be able to have a decent army to protect in each of the directions. So I'm imagining that if our first chapter, there was a letter from Moses to everybody, right? Everybody got a postcard delivered telling them about the census. This one is a private memo, and it's from Yehoshua ben Nun. Yehoshua ben Nun, of course, is Joshua. Joshua is Moses's younger protege, and Joshua will ultimately he served as the military leader. First time that happened was when the Israelites were attacked by the Amalekites. So Joshua, led the people then to a victory. And then in the book of Numbers, we're going to find several battles that take place with the Amorites and with the people of Bashan and the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Midianites. So Joshua will ultimately serve as the military leader. And then, of course, upon the death of Moses, Joshua will be the one who takes over and leads the people into the land of Canaan and conquers it, and is the one who assigns each tribe to a particular geographical section of the land. So I'm imagining the general is sending to the king or the president the following memo from Yehoshua ben Nun to Moshe ben Amram regarding order of the camp. Number one, when we are encamped, the tabernacle should be at our center so that all tribes have equal access to the religious site. In case of a surprise attack, this will also provide protection to our holiest relics. Thus, there will be 4 tribes in each direction. Right? Think about it. Nobody would have really much further to go from their camp to get to the religious center. Right? It was all, I guess, in walking distance at the time. So point number 2, to the east will be Judah, Issachar, and Zvulun. To the south, Reuven, Shimon, and Gad. To the west, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Binyamin. To the north, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. Note that this will make the eastern flank, that's the one with Judah, Issachar, and Zvulun, much more crowded than the western flank. This is being done for military reasons, as shall be explained. Point number 3, when we are on the march, and most importantly, when we go into battle, Judah, the largest tribe, shall lead the way for the largest flank. Judah, Issachar, and Zvulun can put 186,400 men into the field. The southern group, Reuven, Shimon, and Gad, will march second with their 151,450 troops. The western group, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Binyamin, is our smallest with 108,100 troops. They shall go third. The second largest group is that of the north, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. They shall bring up the rear in case we are attacked from behind. They can muster 157,600. You may remember that the total number of men from the age of 20 and above came to 603,550. Right? 603,000. So we're splitting it up into 186,000, 151,000, 108,000, 157,000. And once again, the strongest, the most numerous group will be in the front, and the second most numerous group will be in the rear. And then the two smaller contingents, they will be surrounding the ark and the tabernacle. So when they camped, it was this square, these three circles that we spoke about, tabernacle, Levites, and then the tribes. When they marched, they did it in a straight line, and Judah led the way, and Dan was sort of in the rear, bringing up the rear. And by the way, we're told Dan, the tribe of Dan, is called the Mi'asef, the sort of the gatherers. The first tribe, Judah, they were the Chalutzim. They were the pioneers. Later in 20th century Israel, they adopt this name, the Chalutzim, as being the farmers, right? The agricultural pioneers. But originally, Chalutz meant a military, the people who go first. And Dan, tribe of Dan, was called the Mi'asef. They were the ones who sort of pick up the rear. And we're told that if there were stragglers, right, then it would be the tribe of Dan that would make sure that nobody got left behind. And also we're told, and according to the rabbinic commentaries, they created, in a sense, the first lost and found. If people lost things, left things, dropped things, it was the job of the tribe of Dan to be the Mi'asef, the gatherer who could pick things up. And then when everybody ultimately camped, you knew if you lost something, you could go to the tribe of Dan and you'd be able to find it. So after we read this, we're told, all told, we can put 603,550 men into battle. So there's the military letter from Joshua to Moses, how we're going to organize the camp. Now we come to the book of Numbers, chapter 3. But first, I have to remind you of something that came before. So back in the book of Exodus, in chapter 13 of Exodus, verse 2, it's on page 391 in the Chumash, we read, this is right after the 10th plague. And it's at the time when all the firstborn of Egypt were killed in the 10th plague. So there, it says, the Lord spoke further to Moses, saying, consecrate to me every firstborn, man and beast. The first issue of every womb among the Israelites is mine. So what did that originally mean? If there was an animal, all firstborn animals were to be brought as a sacrifice to God, to the temple or to the sanctuary, right, to the Mishkan. That's the story with the animals. With the firstborn Israelites, Originally, the idea was that God says, they are mine. Well, what did that mean? Back then, at that moment, right, as they're about to leave Egypt, the Egyptian firstborn, both animals and humans, were killed in the 10th plague. And God says, okay, because I spared you, right, all the other firstborn, theirs, died. Your firstborn I spared. Because of that, you belong to me. In what way? Certainly not in the way that firstborn Israelite flocks were going to be sacrificed. The firstborn were to become the priests. And the original idea was that there was going to be a cult, there was going to be some kind of religious rites or rituals, and ultimately, we're told, who would be the priests? It would be the firstborn, right? So you got that job by virtue of the order of birth. That was the original idea. But then we see that there's a change. Not too long after, a couple of months after leaving Egypt, when the Israelites arrive at Mount Sinai, of course, Moses is up on the mountain, and the Israelites are worshiping a golden calf. And at that point, Moses realizes, I can't depend upon people who, firstborn from these 12 tribes. Remember, we've got hundreds and thousands of people. Moses says, I need somebody I can count on, I can depend on. So what happens? There's a change. Instead of the priests being all the firstborn, now Moses decides it's going to be my people, my cousins, the people from the tribe of Levi. I'm a Levite. My brother's a Levite, obviously. My brother will become the Kohen, the priest, and all the cousins, they will become the Leviim, the Levies, and they will carry, knock down, set up the tabernacle, take care of it, do all the things necessary to assist my brother and his sons in offering the sacrifices. So Moses changes the deal. Now, whether he does this on his own, because he says, I can't trust anybody, I need my own people, right? My own family. Those are the only ones I can count on. Or whether God told him to do that, it's not exactly clear. So here's what I'm imagining, that we have this change. God said in chapter 13 of Exodus, do it this way. And now in the book of Numbers, we have a change. So here on page 778, chapter 3 of the book of Numbers, verse 12 and 13, it says, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, I hereby take the Levites from among the Israelites in place of all the firstborn. The first issue of the womb among the Israelites, the Levites shall be mine. For every firstborn is mine. At the time that I smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated every firstborn in Israel, man and beast, to myself, to be mine, the Lord's. But now the Lord is changing his mind. Right? Then he says, I told you it would be all the firstborn, but the Lord spoke to Moses saying, I hereby take the Levites from among the Israelites in place of all the firstborn. Now, God can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, in whatever way he wants. But for us, that notion of the God or of the king who simply decrees something and it goes unchallenged could change his mind today from what he said yesterday, and what are you going to do? It's God. But we would say, wait a minute, there's a law in the Bible. There's a law in the Torah. There's a law in the book of Exodus. It says firstborns. And now in Numbers, you're changing things. You're saying it's the Levites instead of the firstborn. So what are we going to do? Today, we would say you would have to make an amendment. So here's what I'm imagining, that somebody proposes an amendment to the Constitution or the Torah. And the amendment would read as follows. In place of Exodus 13:2, which read, "Consecrate to me every firstborn, man and beast, the first issue of every womb among the Israelites is mine." Now read in Numbers chapter 3, verses 12 and 13, "I hereby take the Levites from among the Israelites in place of all the firstborn, the first issue of the womb among the Israelites. The Levites shall be mine." And then, most importantly, if you're familiar with the American Constitution, you know that when there's a proposed amendment, it always ends something like this. "This amendment shall be in force as of the dedication of the Mishkan." Of course, with the Constitution, you have to have ratification by the various states, and usually there's a time limit when that ratification has to take place by. So I'm imagining that instead of God simply saying, "I changed my mind, we're going to do it this way instead of that way," now we have a proposed amendment, and we're going from all the firstborn to the idea of just the Levites, and within the Levites, the Kohanim. By the way, this leads us to an explanation and an understanding of the custom of Pidyon Haben. A Pidyon Haben, literally redemption of the firstborn. Here was the idea. Remember that the original idea is all firstborn belong to God. In the book of Samuel, we read a wonderful story. We read it on Rosh Hashanah, first day, where Hannah says, "I swear that if God gives me a child, I shall dedicate him to the Lord." So the baby is born. She weans the baby eventually, brings him as a toddler to the temple, and hands him over and said, "I promised that I would give this child to the temple. Here he is." Okay, and Samuel ultimately serves with his mentor Eli, in the tabernacle, and becomes not only a priest of that time, but ultimately a prophet and a leader, a judge of the Jewish people. So originally, all firstborn belonged to God. It's in the books. They didn't have an amendment, right? So that you could cross out Exodus 13 and put in its place Numbers 3. It still says all firstborn belong to God. So the parents, maybe they don't want to give their firstborn over to the temple. And not only that, the temple isn't going to take them. But according to the rules, the firstborn belongs to God. How are we going to solve this problem? So the way that we solve this problem is you, at the 30th day of the child's life, if the child is an Israelite, who, firstborn of whom, would belong to God, right? Not if the child is a Levite, not if the child is a Kohen, meaning his father, right? So what happens? On the 30th day, a ceremony is created, Pidyon Haben, a redemption of the firstborn. Technically, this Israelite firstborn boy belonged to the temple, but we're not giving the kid to the temple, and the temple won't take him. But we got to do this legally. So how do we do this? So you would bring your child to a Kohen. We still do this to this very day. You bring the child to a Kohen. Could be any Kohen. Doesn't have to be a rabbi or clergy, anything. You bring the child to the Kohen. Kohen says, okay, what would you like? You want your kid back? Or are you willing to redeem him for the cost of 5 shekels? And of course, this is a script. Parents don't say, well, let me think it over, right? The Kohen says, Ma bo'it tfei, which would you prefer, the kid or the money? And the parents say, we want our kid, and here's 5 shekels. So there's a very brief ceremony, and we hand over 5 silver dollars or the equivalent. And the Kohen then takes it and he says, have a wonderful life and take your kid. So that becomes the Pidyon Haben, and that's the reason we have to do it, because of this original idea and the amendment that God later made. Okay, so now we come to this week's Haftorah. And now we have something very interesting. We don't do the regular Haftorah this week because Sunday is the beginning of a new Jewish month, the month of Sivan. When the new Jewish month starts on a Sunday, we always do on the Shabbos the day before a special Haftorah called Machar Chodesh, which literally means tomorrow is the new moon. And we read a selection from the book of Samuel, and the very first words go like this. Vayomer lo Yehonatan, Jonathan said to David, Machar Chodesh, tomorrow is the beginning of a new month. And what he then goes on to say is, and the new month was always considered a semi-holiday, and my father, the king, Saul, is going to throw his usual party, and he's going to expect me to be there, and he's going to expect you to be there. Why does Saul expect David to be there? Number one, David is Jonathan's best friend. Number two, David was for a while the musician, the personal musician of King Saul. King Saul apparently suffered from some kind of mental illness. Clearly, we read about him and we find out that he was paranoid, okay? And he perhaps had good reason to. He's the first king. He was not a very self-confident person. And of course, the great hero of the day was teenager David, who killed Goliath. People used to sing songs. Saul has his thousands, meaning has killed his thousands. David, his tens of thousands. David was a much more, a hero of the folk. Saul had a very difficult relationship with most people. So eventually, Saul, who loved David in the beginning, it's his son's best friend. It's the guy who plays the harp and calms him down when he's stressed and anxious and nervous. Eventually, Saul goes over the edge and sees David as a threat. And we read that there was even a time when Saul took a spear and threw it at David and almost killed him. So Saul, seemed to go have he could be up, he could be down. And what happens is the question that Jonathan wants to know is, you and I are both expected to be at my father's palace for the special Rosh Chodesh holiday meal tomorrow. But here's the thing, I'm not really sure what mood my father is in. It's, oh, David, my son's best friend, we're so happy to see you. Or is it David who's trying to steal my crown, right? I'm going to kill you. So Jonathan is simply trying to protect his best friend from his own father. We can imagine the difficult circumstances that Jonathan is in, being caught between his father, and remember, Jonathan is the crown prince. One day he's going to become king, or supposed to become king. But his best friend is David, and he's trying to mediate between his father and his friend, and it's not an easy thing, depending on what Saul's mood is at any given moment. So what happens is Jonathan tells David, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go and see where my father's head is at, see what his mood is. And if he's okay, then I'll let you know that you can come and be with us for the Rosh Chodesh meal. But if, on the other hand, he's crazy, I need to warn you not to come. But how am I going to do this? If my father is paranoid, and if he suspects that even I am working against him and am favoring David, my best friend, then I'm not going to be allowed to run off. I'm going to be constantly followed. So Jonathan comes up with a plan, a secret plan, for how to let David know whether it's safe or not to come to the banquet on Rosh Chodesh, which is tomorrow. So he says, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go target practice out in the field. I want you to be in the field, hiding behind the trees. He said, what I'm going to do, because I can't get alone with you and see you, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot bows and arrows. And I'm going to have my servant boy with me. And here's the code, and it's really quite brilliant. If my father is crazy and David should not come to the banquet, I'm going to shoot real far, and I'm going to tell my servant boy, run, keep going, further, away, away. Now, the boy will think that that means the arrow is keep going to find the arrow. But of course, when Jonathan shouts this, he's really shouting to David, get away, keep going, run, it's not safe. On the other hand, if Saul is fine, Jonathan will shoot, close by, and Jonathan will tell the servant boy, you can come in, it's not that far away. So that's the plan. Here's what I'm imagining. Saul, now here's a part of the story that we don't read, but it's sort of the missing piece. That's what we call midrash, when we attempt to add the missing pieces. And here's my midrash on this story. Saul ordered his general, Avner, keep an eye on Jonathan and to discover David's whereabouts. Avner, how's the general of the army going to keep his eye on Jonathan? Jonathan will be suspicious if the general is following him. Avner went to Jonathan's servant. Listen, boy, I want you to report back to me everywhere that Jonathan goes and everything he says. If I find out that you kept anything from me, I'll personally cut your throat. Do you understand?" So just as Jonathan was caught between his father and his friend, we see that now the servant boy is caught between Jonathan, his master, and Avner, the general. You don't want to mess around with him. The next day, the nervous boy reported back to Avner, "My master," meaning Jonathan, "went out to the field near the forest to practice shooting his bow. He ordered me to stand at a distance and then shot 3 arrows way beyond where I was stationed. Then he told me to run and fetch the arrows." "What did he say to you? Tell me his exact words," Avner asked. "Keep going. Hurry. Don't stop," the boy replied. "Then what happened?" the general asked. The boy took a deep breath. "Jonathan told me to take the arrows back to town, but I hid behind a tree and I saw a man with reddish hair emerge from the forest." Traditionally, David had red hair. "He and Jonathan embraced. I think they were both crying. Then they went off in different directions." "David," Avner said out loud. Jonathan was no doubt warning David that it wasn't safe, that he should run away. He turned to the boy. "You did very well. Say nothing of this to Jonathan. If you hear anything else about David, you report it to me immediately." And Avner handed the boy a silver coin. He turned to go and tell the king. So between Avner's threat to the boy, "You lie to me and I'll cut your throat," and the silver coin that he gives him for spying on Jonathan, we see where the servant boy ultimately decided was the smart thing to do. So this Shabbos, we read, instead of the regular Haftorah for Numbers, Bamidbar, we read the special Haftorah just because the first line says, "Tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh." And indeed, on Saturday, tomorrow will be Rosh Chodesh. This time, it will be the new month of Sivan. So we'll hold it there. We'll pick up services in about 10, 15 minutes with Mari. We'll take a little break.